Imagine being a professional surfer, someone who understands the ocean like few others do, only to vanish in the most catastrophic wave event in modern history. 5 years later, recreational divers exploring an underwater cave system discover your body, not swept there by chance, but deliberately tied upside down to rock formations with climbing rope, positioned as if you were placed there long after the tsunami passed. This is the story of Jake Morrison, a 31-year-old big wave surfer from San Diego who traveled to Thailand for the waves of his life and instead encountered something far more sinister than nature's fury. What investigators discovered about his final hours proved that sometimes the deadliest predators aren't in the water. They're the ones who use disaster as cover for unspeakable acts. On December 23, 2004, at 7:15 in the morning Bangkok time, Jake Morrison posted a photo to his surf blog from Khao Lak, Thailand. The image showed him standing on a beach at sunrise, surfboard under his arm, caption reading, "Pumped for tomorrow's session, forecast looking incredible. This is why I do this." Jake Morrison was exactly the kind of person who lived for moments like that. At 31, he'd built a modest but dedicated following in the professional surfing world. He wasn't a household name, but in the tight-knit community of big wave surfers, he was respected, known for his fearlessness, his technical skill, and his almost spiritual connection to the ocean. Born in La Jolla, California in 1973, Jake had grown up with saltwater in his veins. His father was a marine biologist, his mother a dive instructor. By age 5, he was swimming. By 7, he was surfing. By 18, he'd won his first competition. After college, where he'd studied oceanography while competing in surf contests, he'd turned professional, traveling the world chasing swells. He wasn't rich. Professional surfing, unless you're at the very top, pays modestly. Jake worked part-time as a surf instructor and lifeguard in San Diego to fund his travels. But money wasn't the point. The ocean was his church, surfing his meditation, and big waves his calling. In December 2004, Jake traveled to Thailand's Andaman coast for the winter swell season. The area was a surfer's paradise. Warm water, consistent waves, and far cheaper than Hawaii or Australia. He'd been there before, in 2002, and loved the laid-back beach culture of Khao Lak, a small tourist town about an hour north of Phuket. Jake had arrived on December 18th and checked into a modest beachside bungalow at the Andaman Sea Resort. He traveled alone, as he often did, preferring the freedom to surf whenever conditions were right. Over the next few days, he'd connected with other surfers at the beach, a German couple, 2 Australian guys, a Thai surf guide named Sumchai, who knew the local breaks. On December 25th, the swell forecast showed promise. Offshore winds, clean sets, chest-to-head high waves. Jake had sent an email to his girlfriend, Rachel, back in San Diego at 11:30 p.m. on December 24th. "Big day tomorrow. Perfect conditions. Might paddle out for sunrise session if the light's good. Miss you. Love you." That email would be the last communication anyone received from him. December 26th, 2004, began like any other perfect surf day in Thailand. The sun rose at 6:42 a.m. over calm seas. Jake was seen by multiple witnesses loading his board onto his rented motorcycle around 6:30 a.m. A shop owner near the resort remembered him buying a bottle of water and a banana. He was wearing blue board shorts, a white rash guard, and a waterproof watch. His demeanor was cheerful, excited. By 7:15 a.m., Jake was in the water at a beach break called Sunset Reef, about 2 miles north of his bungalow. 3 other surfers were there with him, the 2 Australians, Mark and Connor, and Samchai. The waves were clean, the wind offshore, the session magical. Jake was ripping, Connor would later tell investigators. He was getting these long, beautiful rides. We were all stoked, just a perfect morning. At 7:58 a.m. local time, something happened that no one in the water could have predicted. 240 miles to the west, deep beneath the Indian Ocean floor off the coast of Sumatra, a massive tectonic rupture had occurred. A magnitude 9.1 earthquake, the third largest ever recorded, triggered a series of tsunami waves that radiated outward at the speed of a commercial jet. The surfers in the water at Khao Lak didn't feel the earthquake. They were too far away. But what was coming would arrive in less than 2 hours, traveling across open ocean at 500 miles per hour. At approximately 9:25 a.m., Somchai noticed something odd. The ocean seemed to be pulling back, receding from the beach at an unnatural speed. Rocks that were normally underwater suddenly appeared. Fish flopped on the exposed reef. "That's not normal," Somchai said, paddling toward shore. "Something's wrong." The other surfers followed, confused. Tourists on the beach were walking out onto the exposed sand, picking up stranded fish, taking photos. Some were laughing. Somchai knew better. He'd heard stories from the old fishermen. When the ocean pulls back like that, it means something is coming. He started running up the beach, shouting in Thai and English, "Tsunami! Get away from the water! Run inland! Now!" Most people ignored him. A tsunami? Here? It seemed impossible. Jake Morrison had paddled in and was standing at the water's edge, watching the strange phenomenon. Connor was next to him. Mark was still in the shallow water, looking out at the horizon. That's when they saw it. A dark line on the horizon, growing taller. Not a wave, a wall. A moving mountain of water, white foam churning at its crest, advancing toward the coast with terrifying speed. "Oh my God," Jake said. There was no time to run, no time to do anything but brace. The first wave hit at 9:37 a.m. It was approximately 30 feet high when it reached the beach, traveling at 25 miles per hour. It didn't break like a normal wave. It simply rose up and rolled inland, a churning mass of water that picked up everything in its path: boats, cars, motorcycles, buildings, trees, people. Jake Morrison, Mark, Connor, and dozens of tourists were swept away instantly. Somchai, who'd made it about 200 yards inland, was caught by the surge and thrown against a concrete building. He survived by grabbing onto a palm tree and holding on as the water roared past. The wave traveled nearly 2 miles inland before its energy dissipated. Then, as the physics of tsunamis dictate, the water began flowing back toward the sea, carrying with it the debris of destroyed buildings and the bodies of the dead and dying. The 2000-mile Indian Ocean tsunami would ultimately kill approximately 230,000 people across 14 countries. It was one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Thailand alone lost over 8,000 people, many of them tourists who'd been enjoying Christmas holiday on the beaches. Jake Morrison was one of them, or so everyone assumed. In the immediate aftermath of the tsunami, chaos reigned. Khao Lak was devastated. Hotels were destroyed, roads impassable, communication systems down. Bodies were everywhere, floating in water, buried in debris, scattered across what had once been a tropical paradise. International rescue teams arrived within days. The Thai government set up makeshift morgues. The grim process of identifying victims began. Many bodies were so damaged by the force of the water that identification required dental records or DNA. Rachel Santos, Jake's girlfriend, received word of the tsunami on December 26th while at her parents' home in San Diego for Christmas. She immediately tried calling Jake. No answer. She emailed. No response. She called the Andaman Sea Resort. The line was dead. For 3 days, she existed in a nightmare of uncertainty. Then, on December 29th, Connor, one of the Australian surfers who'd survived, managed to get word to the U.S. Embassy. He reported that Jake had been in the water when the wave hit and hadn't been seen since. Rachel flew to Thailand on December 30th. What she found was overwhelming. Thousands of people were missing. The morgues were full. Bodies were being laid out in temple courtyards, refrigerated trucks, anywhere with space. Foreign nationals were helping identify their countrymen. For 2 weeks, Rachel walked through those terrible places, looking at faces, checking lists, hoping not to find Jake, and simultaneously terrified that she wouldn't. She filed missing person reports with Thai police, the U.S. Embassy, and international disaster relief organizations. The official search for survivors ended on January 10, 2005. After 2 weeks, the focus shifted to body recovery and debris removal. The death toll was still climbing, but anyone still missing was presumed dead. Mark and Connor, the other surfers from that morning, had both survived. Mark had been badly injured but was pulled from debris by rescuers. Connor had managed to grab onto a floating refrigerator and ride out the surge. Both gave statements to investigators. "Jake was right next to me when the wave hit," Connor said. "The water just took him. It was like being inside a washing machine. I tried to look for him after, but there was so much debris, so much chaos. I don't see how anyone could have survived that without getting lucky." Sumchai, the Thai surf guide, told investigators he'd seen Jake's bright blue board shorts in the water as the surge pulled back toward the sea. But then the second wave had come, not as large but still powerful. And after that, he saw nothing. The first theory was simple and heartbreaking. Jake had drowned in the initial impact or been killed by debris. His body had been swept out to sea and would never be recovered. This was the fate of thousands. The ocean had taken them and wouldn't give them back. But Rachel refused to accept this. Jake was a professional waterman, she told anyone who would listen. He could hold his breath for over 4 minutes. He'd surfed waves bigger than that tsunami. If anyone could survive being in the water, it was him. Investigators gently suggested that training didn't matter when you were hit by thousands of tons of water traveling at 25 miles per hour. The force alone could kill instantly. The second theory emerged from witness reports. Several survivors mentioned seeing people alive in the aftermath, trapped under debris or clinging to wreckage, calling for help. In the chaos, not everyone could be saved immediately. Perhaps Jake had survived the initial wave but died later from injuries, trapped somewhere in the debris field. Search teams combed the destruction for weeks. They used dogs trained to detect bodies. They checked every collapsed building, every pile of rubble. Jake's surfboard was never found. His body was never found. His rented motorcycle was discovered 3 miles inland, wrapped around a tree. By February 2005, Thai authorities declared Jake Morrison legally deceased, presumed to have died in the tsunami. His name was added to the memorial lists, along with thousands of others. Rachel returned to the United States devastated. She kept Jake's apartment exactly as he'd left it. His surfboards lined the walls. His wetsuit still hung in the bathroom. She created a memorial website, sharing stories and photos, keeping his memory alive. A memorial service was held in La Jolla on March 12, 2005. Over 300 people attended, surfers, friends, family, students he'd taught. They paddled out at sunset, formed a circle in the water, and threw flower leis into the ocean. It was a traditional surfer's memorial, a way to give his spirit back to the sea he'd loved. But some questions lingered. Jake's father, David Morrison, a scientist by nature, couldn't accept the lack of closure. In the months following the tsunami, he hired a private investigator who specialized in disaster recovery. The investigator traveled to Thailand, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed the search records. His report concluded, "It's highly likely Jake Morrison died in the tsunami." However, the specific location and circumstances of his death cannot be determined. The force and chaos of the event make recovery of remains unlikely. The ocean may have taken his body far from shore, or it may be buried under debris that will take years to fully excavate. David Morrison accepted this. Reluctantly, painfully, he accepted it. The case was closed. Life moved on. The world rebuilt. 5 years would pass before the truth emerged from the depths. By 2009, Khao Lak had largely recovered from the tsunami. New hotels had been built. Tourists were returning. The scars were still visible. Empty lots where buildings once stood, memorial sites, a warning system for future tsunamis. But life had resumed. The ocean itself, of course, was unchanged. The reefs, the waves, the underwater geography, all exactly as they had been before December 26, 2004. On November 8, 2009, a group of recreational divers from Singapore were exploring an underwater cave system about 3 miles north of Khao Lak, in an area known locally as the Dragon's Mouth. The site wasn't commonly dived. It required advanced certification due to the depth, 90 feet, and the complexity of the caves. But for experienced divers, it was spectacular. Limestone formations, schools of fish, and interconnected chambers that created a maze-like environment. The dive team consisted of 4 people: Li Wei, 42, a dive instructor, his girlfriend Priya Kumar, 38, a marine photographer, and 2 clients, Daniel Hoffman, 35, and his wife Emma, 33, both from Germany. They'd planned to explore the outer chambers of the cave system, staying in open water with clear sightlines to the exit. Cave diving was dangerous, and even experienced divers knew not to venture too deep into unexplored passages. At approximately 10:15 a.m., about 25 minutes into their dive, Priya was photographing a school of batfish near the cave entrance when she noticed something unusual deeper in the main chamber. Her camera's strobe light had caught a reflection, something that didn't look natural. She signaled to Li Wei, pointing into the darker recesses of the cave. He checked his air gauge, gave her a thumbs up, and the 2 of them slowly swam deeper while Daniel and Emma waited at the entrance. The cave descended at a gentle slope, the sunlight fading to a dim blue-green glow. Li Wei's powerful dive light cut through the water. The limestone walls were covered in coral and anemones. Small fish darted away from the beam, and then Priya saw it clearly. A human figure, suspended in the water, upside down. For a moment, her brain couldn't process it. Divers don't float upside down. Bodies don't stay in caves. But as Li Wei's light illuminated the scene, the horror became clear. It was a body. Long dead, partially preserved by the cold water and lack of oxygen in the deep cave. But it wasn't floating. It was tied, rope wrapped around the ankles, secured to a rocky outcrop on the cave ceiling, suspending the body head down like some grotesque decoration. Priya made a sound into her regulator, a muffled gasp. Her heart rate spiked. Li Wei grabbed her arm, steadying her, but his eyes were wide with shock behind his mask. The body was male, wearing only what looked like deteriorated board shorts. The flesh was pale, bloated, but largely intact due to the cold, stable environment. The face was turned toward them, features distorted but still human. One arm hung straight down toward the cave floor. The other was bent at an unnatural angle. But the most disturbing detail was the rope. It wasn't frayed. It wasn't the kind of rope that would be used in diving or fishing. It was climbing rope, bright yellow, synthetic, the kind used in mountaineering or caving. And it was tied in precise knots, the kind someone with technical knowledge would use. Li Wei knew immediately that this was no accident. Bodies didn't tie themselves upside down in underwater caves. This was a crime scene. He signaled to Priya, "Up, now!" They needed to surface, call authorities, and get far away from whatever dark thing they'd stumbled into. The 2 divers returned to Daniel and Emma, made the universal cut signal across their throats, end the dive, and led the group back to the surface. When they broke through the water and removed their regulators, Priya was hyperventilating. "There's a body down there," she said to the others. Someone put a body down there." Li Wei had the presence of mind to mark the GPS coordinates on his dive computer. They motored back to shore as quickly as safety allowed and went straight to the police station in Khao Lak. The officer on duty initially seemed skeptical. Bodies in underwater caves, tourists saw strange things diving, groupers that looked humanoid, debris that resembled corpses. But when Li Wei insisted it was real, that he'd seen the rope, seen the knots, the officer made a call to his superior. By 3:00 p.m., a Thai police dive team was at the site. By 4:30 p.m., they'd confirmed it. There was indeed a body in the cave, male, Caucasian, tied upside down to the rock formation at approximately 85 feet depth. The recovery operation began the next morning. It took a specialized team, police divers, a medical examiner's assistant, and forensic photographers, 3 hours to document the scene and carefully remove the body. What they brought to the surface shocked everyone who saw it. The body was remarkably preserved. Cold water, low oxygen, and stable temperature had slowed decomposition significantly. The victim was wearing blue board shorts, no shirt, no shoes. A waterproof watch was still on his wrist, stopped at 9:44 a.m. But it was the rope that drew the most attention. Bright yellow climbing rope, still vibrant despite 5 years underwater, wrapped multiple times around both ankles and tied to a 50-pound rock with a sophisticated anchor knot. Whoever had placed this body here knew what they were doing. The body was transported to the office of the chief medical examiner in Phuket. Dental records were requested from Interpol for any missing persons from the tsunami. DNA samples were taken. On November 12, 2009, a match was found. The body was Jake Morrison, the surfer from San Diego who'd vanished in the tsunami 5 years earlier. But the medical examiner's preliminary findings raised immediate questions. The cause of death was drowning, but injuries to the skull and cervical spine indicated blunt force trauma before death. The rope bindings showed no signs of decay or marine growth that would suggest 5 years of submersion. They looked recently placed, possibly within weeks or months before the body was discovered. Most disturbing, the depth and location where he was found was impossible to reach during the tsunami's chaos. The cave entrance was 40 feet underwater even at low tide. Someone had deliberately placed Jake Morrison's body there, someone who knew how to dive, who had access to technical equipment, and who wanted the body hidden where it might never be found. Jake Morrison hadn't simply died in the tsunami. Someone had killed him, and that someone was still out there. The discovery transformed the case from a tragic tsunami death to an active murder investigation. The Thai Royal Police, working with FBI attachés from the U.S. Embassy, assembled a task force specifically to investigate Jake Morrison's death. Detective Inspector Adisorn Wacharakal led the investigation. With 22 years of experience and fluency in English, he was the natural choice. His first question was simple but crucial. When did Jake Morrison actually die? The medical examiner's full report, completed on November 18, 2009, provided disturbing answers. Based on the state of decomposition, the temperature and environment of the cave, and analysis of tissue samples, Dr. Sarawut Prasert estimated that Jake had been dead for approximately 5 years, consistent with dying during or shortly after the tsunami. But the condition of the rope told a different story. Marine growth patterns on underwater rope occur predictably in Thai waters. The yellow climbing rope showed growth consistent with being submerged for only 2 to 3 years, not 5. This meant Jake Morrison had died in December 2004, but his body wasn't placed in the cave until sometime in 2006 or 2007. Where had it been for those 2 years? The investigation expanded to examine the specific type of rope. It was a 10 mm dynamic climbing rope, manufactured by a German company called Edelrid. This particular color and specification was sold primarily through specialty outdoor stores in Southeast Asia. Police contacted distributors in Thailand and discovered that between 2005 and 2007, only 3 stores in the Phuket Khao Lak area had stocked this exact rope. Customer purchase records from that time period were spotty at best, but one name appeared in connection with the rope that made investigators pause. A dive shop in Patong Beach, called Deep Blue Adventures, had purchased 6 coils of this rope in March 2006. Deep Blue Adventures was owned by a British expatriate named Colin Marsh, 47, who'd been living in Thailand since 2001. Marsh was a certified dive instructor and technical cave diver, one of only a few dozen people in Thailand with the training and experience to dive to 90 feet in an underwater cave and execute the kind of precise placement found at the scene. Background checks revealed that Marsh had been in Khao Lak during the tsunami. In fact, he'd been one of the volunteer divers who'd helped with body recovery in the weeks after. He'd been praised for his efforts, credited with recovering 7 bodies from underwater debris. Investigators interviewed him on November 20, 2009. Colin Marsh was cooperative, almost friendly. Yes, he'd purchased that rope. He used it for various purposes, securing equipment on boats, cave diving, teaching knot skills. Yes, he'd been in Khao Lak during the tsunami. Horrible tragedy. He'd done what he could to help. Did he know Jake Morrison? Marsh hesitated just for a second, then, the name sounds familiar. Was he one of the victims? Investigators showed him a photo of Jake taken from his surf blog. Oh, Marsh said. Yes, I think I met him. Just briefly the day before the tsunami. He was surfing. We talked about dive sites. This was new information. No one had mentioned Jake talking to a British dive instructor the day before he died. Further investigation revealed more connections. Phone records showed Marsh had made multiple calls to Khao Lak in late 2006 and early 2007, the time period when Jake's body was likely placed in the cave. Credit card records showed he'd rented dive equipment in Khao Lak on 3 separate occasions during those years, always paying cash, always brief one-day trips. But the breakthrough came from a storage locker Marsh rented in Phuket. A search warrant was executed on November 25, 2009. Inside, investigators found additional coils of yellow edelrid rope, same specification as that used to bind Jake. A dive log from December 2006 showing coordinates that matched the Dragon's Mouth cave system. Photographs on a digital camera showing the underwater cave from various angles, including shots that appeared to be taken from inside, looking at the spot where Jake's body was found. A waterproof dry bag containing men's clothing, including a white rash guard with Morrison written in permanent marker on the inside collar. Jake's. Most damning was a notebook filled with dense handwriting. Much of it was typical dive notes, depths, times, air consumption. But several entries stood out. March 15, 2006, the American, problem solved, deep storage. December 8, 2006, relocated package, Dragon's Mouth, 85 feet, stable environment, won't float, good anchor point. July 2007, checked on package, still secure, no one diving that deep. Perfect. Colin Marsh was arrested on November 26, 2009, and charged with the murder of Jake Morrison. Colin James Marsh was born in Brighton, England in 1962. He'd served in the Royal Navy as a young man, receiving training in deep-sea diving and demolitions. After leaving the service in 1989, he'd worked as a commercial diver in the North Sea, then transitioned to recreational dive instruction. In 2001, he'd moved to Thailand, drawn by the warm water, low cost of living, and thriving dive tourism industry. He'd opened Deep Blue Adventures in 2002 and built a reputation as a skilled but demanding instructor who specialized in technical and cave diving. Those who knew him described him as intense, sometimes abrasive, with a dark sense of humor. He had few close friends, but was respected in the tight-knit diving community. He was known to be obsessive about safety protocols and disdainful of tourist divers, who he felt treated the ocean carelessly. During his interrogation, Marsh initially maintained his innocence. The notebook? Just dive notes, nothing to do with Jake. The photos? He'd been mapping the cave system for his own purposes. The clothing? He'd found it in debris and kept it, intending to turn it in but forgot. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic analysis of the rope showed fibers consistent with the coils in his storage locker. The dive log coordinates matched the crime scene precisely. Most damning, traces of Jake's DNA were found on the rash guard in the dry bag, along with Marsh's own DNA on the rope used to bind the body. Faced with the evidence, Marsh's story changed. He requested to speak to investigators alone, without his lawyer present. What he revealed was chilling. According to Marsh's confession, given on December 3, 2009, he had indeed met Jake Morrison on December 25, 2004. They'd talked on the beach about diving and surfing. Marsh had suggested they dive together sometime. Jake had been friendly but non-committal. The next morning, as the tsunami struck, Marsh had been inland checking on his equipment storage facility. He survived the first wave but was caught by the second, smaller surge. He'd managed to cling to a concrete pillar and wait out the chaos. In the hours after, as he was walking through the devastation looking for people to help, he'd found Jake Morrison trapped under debris, a collapsed bungalow roof pinning his legs. Jake was alive, conscious, calling for help. "I could have saved him," Marsh told investigators, his voice flat. "I had the strength to lift the debris. But when I looked at him, all I could think about was how he represented everything I hated about surf tourism in Thailand. These rich, arrogant Westerners who treated the ocean like their personal playground, who came here, took waves from locals, acted like they owned the place." Marsh admitted he'd stood there, watching Jake beg for help, for approximately 10 minutes. Then, instead of freeing him, he'd found a piece of rebar and struck Jake twice in the head. "I told myself I was putting him out of his misery," Marsh said. "The tsunami had already killed thousands. One more wouldn't matter. Who would even know?" But disposing of the body proved difficult. The area was crawling with rescue workers, so Marsh dragged Jake's body into a collapsed building's basement and covered it with debris. He planned to return later, when things calmed down, and dispose of it properly. For over a year, Jake's body remained hidden in that makeshift grave. Marsh visited periodically, ensuring the site remained undisturbed as the cleanup efforts progressed around it. In March 2006, when the building was finally scheduled for demolition, Marsh retrieved the body under cover of night, placed it in a large duffel bag, and stored it in a refrigerated shipping container he had access to at his dive shop. "I knew I had to move it somewhere permanent," Marsh said. "Somewhere no one would ever look." In December 2006, he transported the body to the Dragon's Mouth cave system using his dive boat. At night, alone, he dove down to the cave, brought the body in pieces in weighted bags, and carefully positioned it in the deepest chamber, tied upside down to ensure it wouldn't float, even if decomposition produced gases. "I thought it was poetic," Marsh said. "A surfer, someone who loved the surface, spending eternity in the depths, where the water pressure would keep him in place forever." When asked if he felt remorse, Marsh was silent for a long moment. "I feel relief that I don't have to carry the secret anymore," he finally said. "But remorse? No. He died because of his own arrogance, being in a place he didn't belong. I just helped nature finish what it started." Psychological evaluation by Dr. Chanita Somkwan found Marsh to be competent but suffering from antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic traits. He'd rationalized murder as a form of environmental justice, seeing himself as a guardian of the ocean, punishing those who disrespected it. Colin Marsh was formally charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. His trial began in March 2010. The trial took place in provincial court in Phuket, Thailand. Due to the international attention, an American victim, a British perpetrator, a crime connected to one of history's deadliest natural disasters, the proceedings were closely watched by media from multiple countries. The prosecution, led by Chief Prosecutor Niran Pitak Paivan, presented a methodical case. They showed the jury Thailand uses jury trials for serious criminal cases involving foreign nationals. The photographs from the underwater cave, the rope with Jake's DNA, the notebook with its damning entries, and the timeline showing Marsh's movements over the 5 years between the murder and discovery. Rachel Santos, Jake's former girlfriend, flew to Thailand to testify. She spoke about Jake's character, his love for the ocean, his respect for local cultures and environments. "He wasn't arrogant," she said, crying. "He was one of the most humble people I've ever known. He understood the power of the ocean better than anyone. The idea that he somehow deserved what happened to him is obscene. The medical examiner testified about the injuries to Jake's skull, explaining that they were inconsistent with tsunami trauma. The blows had come from a narrow object, possibly rebar, and had been delivered with significant force while Jake was stationary, not possible in moving water. The dive team that had discovered Jake testified about the scene, the precise knots, the positioning, the clear evidence of deliberate placement. Colin Marsh's defense attorney, Peter Hammond, argued that his client had suffered a psychological break during the trauma of the tsunami. Watching thousands die, being surrounded by bodies and destruction, had caused acute stress disorder that made him unable to think rationally. Jake's death was manslaughter, not murder. The concealment of the body was the act of a confused, traumatized man, not a cold-blooded killer. Dr. Chinita's psychiatric evaluation was challenged. The defense brought their own psychiatrist, who testified that Marsh showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder and that his actions, while criminal, were not those of a person in full control of their faculties. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They showed that Marsh had continued his dive business normally after the tsunami. He'd taught courses, led tours, maintained his equipment. He'd written coherent dive logs, managed finances, and lived his life with no apparent psychological impairment. The only thing he'd done differently was regularly visit a hidden corpse and eventually move it to an underwater tomb. This is not the behavior of someone who's mentally incapacitated, prosecutor Patak Paivan argued. This is the behavior of someone who committed murder and spent 5 years carefully covering it up. Colin Marsh knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On April 7, 2010, they returned their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of abuse of a corpse. Guilty of obstruction of justice. Colin Marsh showed no reaction. He sat still, staring straight ahead as the verdict was read. At sentencing a week later, Jake Morrison's father, David, delivered a statement to the court. "My son died twice," he said. "Once when this man struck him and left him to die in the rubble. And again when we were told he'd been swept away by the tsunami, that we'd never know what happened to him, never be able to lay him to rest. For 5 years we believed nature had taken our son. The truth is somehow worse. Nature didn't kill Jake. A human being did, someone who had the power to save him and chose not to, someone who then hid his body like garbage in an underwater cave. Colin Marsh didn't just take my son's life. He took our right to grieve properly, to bury him, to have closure. That's unforgivable." Judge Zomchai Ngamsam delivered the sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole, to be served in Bang Kwang Central Prison in Bangkok, Thailand's most secure facility. "Mr. Marsh," the judge said, "you took a life during one of humanity's darkest hours. While others were saving people, you chose to kill. While others were helping families find their loved ones, you were hiding evidence of your crime. You have shown no remorse, no humanity, no recognition of the magnitude of what you've done. You will spend the rest of your life behind bars. And that is less than you deserve." Colin Marsh was led away in shackles. He would be 48 years old when he entered prison. He'll die there. Jake Morrison's remains were cremated in Thailand with Buddhist rites per his family's wishes. His ashes were divided, half scattered at Khao Lak, where he'd gone into the water that last morning, and half brought back to California for a private ceremony at La Jolla Shores, the beach where he'd learned to surf as a child. On December 26, 2010, the 6th anniversary of the tsunami, a memorial plaque was placed at the dive site near the Dragon's Mouth Caves. It bears Jake's name, his dates, and a simple inscription: "May he rest in peace in the ocean he loved." The Morrison family used the attention from the trial to establish the Jake Morrison Ocean Safety Foundation, which provides emergency training for surf instructors and lifeguards in developing countries. To date, they've trained over 3,000 people in Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines in tsunami awareness and water rescue. Rachel Santos eventually scattered Jake's surfboard, the one that had hung on her apartment wall for 5 years, into the ocean at sunset. She said she'd held onto it as a way of holding on to hope, but now that she had answers, she could let it go. She's since remarried and has 2 children, but she says she thinks about Jake every time she sees the ocean. The dive shop Deep Blue Adventures was closed and its assets liquidated. The proceeds went to tsunami relief charities. The location where it operated is now a beachside restaurant, and most tourists have no idea of its dark history. Colin Marsh remains in Bang Kwang prison. According to prison records, he's had no visitors and has declined all interview requests. He works in the prison's furniture workshop and keeps to himself. Fellow inmates say he never talks about his crime. The Dragon's Mouth cave system is no longer open to recreational divers. Thai authorities have restricted access, citing safety concerns, though locals know the real reason. The ocean, they say, shouldn't be a graveyard, and some places are better left undisturbed. In the years since Jake's body was found, 3 other bodies from the 2004 tsunami have been discovered in unusual circumstances, not washed ashore, but hidden in ways that suggest human intervention. Investigators have looked for connections to Colin Marsh, but no evidence links him to those cases. It raises the question, how many others died not from the tsunami itself, but from the people who used the disaster as cover? The exact number may never be known. In chaos, monsters hide. In tragedy, evil finds opportunity. The beaches of Khao Lak are beautiful again. Tourists return each year, unaware that 5 years after the deadliest tsunami in modern history, something even darker was revealed in the depths. The waves roll in as they always have, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to human cruelty. Jake Morrison loved the ocean. He respected its power, understood its dangers, and trusted in its beauty. In the end, it wasn't the ocean that killed him. It was a man who saw disaster as permission to murder, who used the chaos of nature to hide the calculated violence of human evil. And somewhere in the deep waters off Thailand, in the places where light doesn't reach and pressure keeps secrets buried, the ocean holds other stories. Stories that may never surface. Stories that died when the waves came and were hidden by those who knew that in the aftermath of catastrophe, one more death would barely be noticed. Jake's story emerged only because a group of divers went 85 feet deep and looked where no one else had. Without them, he'd still be there, tied upside down in the darkness, his death attributed to a tsunami rather than a man with a piece of rebar and a complete absence of conscience. The memorial plaque at the dive site includes one final line, added by Rachel. "The ocean took his life, but a man stole his death." It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying predators aren't sharks or currents or even tsunamis. Sometimes they're the people standing next to you when disaster strikes, calculating whether your death serves their purpose.